Good afternoon. Glad to see you back for our final session of the day. And what a crowd we have. It sounds as if we must have a really important program coming up. All right? I hope that all of you have been completing your electronic evaluations during today's sessions. Note that you can access those evaluations in the event app if you've downloaded it. You can do it on paper or through the Exchange community. You may also do it by email or scanning the QR code. Now, as you know, the Business Accreditation Task Force has been collecting your feedback for months regarding the business accreditation standards, and we are now ready to share and discuss the first exposure draft of the proposed changes. The presentation will begin now, and there will be a bonus session beginning tomorrow morning at 8:15. Because we know that you'll have a lot of questions, we reserve the time beginning at 8:15 tomorrow morning for your questions. Please join me now in welcoming Stephanie Bryant, the Executive Vice President and Chief Accreditation Officer at AACSB, and the Task Force co-chairs, Nancy Bugranoff, who is the former Dean and Professor at the University of Richmond Robbins School of Business, and Deputy Vice Chancellor at Auckland University of Technology, Jeff Perry. Please join me in welcoming all three.
Welcome, everybody. We're so excited to see such a good crowd. I know they were holding you outside, and we thought, oh, nobody's going to come. So we're excited to see you. So welcome to Plenary Session 2. The topic of this, of course, is to unveil our exposure draft number 1 of the Business Accreditation Standards. I'm Stephanie Bryant, Chief Accreditation Officer.
Nancy Bugranoff, University of Richmond.
Jeff Perry, Auckland University of Technology, and incoming Chief Officer, Asia Pacific.
Woohoo! Yes. So we welcome you in the audience, and we also welcome those of you who are joining us through our live stream. So today, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the process that we used to come up with this exposure draft. How exactly did we get there? We're going to take you through a very high level of the 9 standards. And then again, as Linda said, we're going to take questions tomorrow. So I know you're going to have lots of questions. We dedicated a whole hour to this tomorrow, 8:15 to 9:15, in a bonus session. So if you'll write down your questions as you go, and then you'll have an opportunity tomorrow, the floor will be yours. So this is the first exposure draft number 1, and I want to emphasize that because it's really the starting point for what will eventually be our final standards. An exposure draft is put out for public comment. We expect that there will be lots of changes to this document, but what we do by putting it out is we invite you to tell us, did we get this right, what do you like, or where do we have opportunities for improvement? So we will have this document out for 2 months, and the membership will be able to send us suggestions. We'll also be in lots of places over the fall, lots of meetings, so we'll be taking your input at those meetings as well. And then at the end of that 60 days, the BATF will then sit back and say, okay, what did we hear? This is all about listening to you. We say these are your standards that you agree to hold each other accountable for. Exposure draft number 2 then will be issued in the spring, approximately in conjunction with the Dean's Conference. And that will be a version that will be very close to the final version. Still not the final, because there'll still be an opportunity for input at that point. And then the final version will be voted on at ICAM in Denver, Colorado on April 27th at our annual business meeting. So that's the process that we'll use. And now we'd like to tell you a little bit about who was on the task force, how they were chosen, and sort of a little bit about the experience that they have.
Thanks. The task force was put together in August 2018, a year ago. And the aim was to bring together a group of leaders from across the membership, from across the world, representing the wide range of types of business schools that we have within AACSB. And what's interesting, if we look at the 15 members from the task force who have worked incredibly hard over the last year, As you can see, there are over 250 years of collective accreditation experience, but no one is owning up to who's got the most. We also note that we have business education from across six continents, and we cover a wide range of fields of expertise. Throughout the year, we've been involved in a lot of engagement with the membership and external businesses, all of the stakeholders associated with AACSB. There have been 50,000 member contacts in that time. That's emails, blogs, links, the newsletter that we've sent out. More than 45 conferences, regional meetings and committee meetings where the standards have been discussed. Over 250 individuals submitted directly input into the process, and all of AACSB's major operating committees have had discussions on this. In fact, it's gone through a number of them a couple of times. And the BATF is met 18 times in the year. So if you think about that, 15 deans able to meet 18 times in the year, sometimes in person and sometimes virtually. So I've just got a question. We've talked about, there've been messages sent out, the contacts through newsletters, there've been conferences where this has been discussed, and there've been individuals giving feedback. Could you put up your hand if you were involved in any of those, if you're involved in feeding back at all? Okay. All right. So for those of you who weren't, your opportunity is now, after this first draft goes out, you'll have 60 days, and then you'll have your chance to feedback to us starting tomorrow at the bonus question section. So to talk about the goals for the standards for the review, I'll hand over to Stephanie.
Nancy.
Sorry, Nancy.
That's all right. So you may remember at the outset we said we were going to reimagine business accreditation. The standards are one piece of that. There were actually 3 goals and 3 things that we are working on. You're hearing about the standards today, but in addition to the standards, we're going to talk about a little bit, give you a preview of something else we're working on, which is volunteer training, and then also process. So let me start with the standards. That's what you care about right now. We listen to you, and I love that Stephanie keeps reminding us to say, these aren't our standards. They're not the standards of the Business Accreditation Task Force. These are your standards, the standards of our member schools. So we have listened, we think. We're going to continue listening, as Jeff pointed out. What have we done with these standards? We worked hard to streamline them, just make them a little bit more condensed and more meaningful. There was some redundancy. We tried to eliminate that where we could. We have actually 2 documents now. We have a standards document, and you'll see some things that are familiar to you there, the definitions, the basis for judgment. We actually have suggested documentation rather than guidance for documentation. Now it's suggested documentation. And then we have an interpretive guidance document that contains rationale, interpretive guidance, just the things that help you actually, as you're trying to write your reports, to do them a little bit more easily. And then some examples in there, which might be sample tables, for example. So that's the structure of the new ones. We don't have any appendices in the new standards, and we've reduced the standards from 15 to 9. How many of you think that's a good idea? So there will be 9 standards. I can't memorize 15 things, but I can 9. Much more principles-based and outcomes-focused. We worked hard. That was a goal of ours. Globally oriented. That's the flexibility that we provide in the standards so that all of our schools around the world are able to comply. Much more flexible on faculty qualifications, and you'll see that especially when we talk about deployment. Volunteer training. Everybody's going to get trained. You're going to have to get trained on these standards. If you move to a principles-based standard model, which we think is the right model, we've got to have a bit more training because there's more judgment involved. So everybody's going to get trained up, but we're going to try to make that easy for you. You can do it online. You can do it in person. You'll be able to do it without any charge, so it won't cost you anything to do it. But it will be mandatory for everybody, and we think that that'll help dispel a lot of myths. You know, we still hear peer review teams occasionally, you may have heard them, who might say something and you think, well, wait, that's not quite accurate. We want to try to help with those myths, especially as I said, we apply more judgment. So volunteer training, And then the processes. We're working on this, so we don't have news for you today about this, but there are actually two types of processes. Some are non-technology related, and those are the things like the cycle time. How often do you have a visit? What's the follow-up on the visit? What's the composition of the peer review team? What does the report look like? So all of those different things around the processes we are working on and thinking about, and we actually started a lot of that work this weekend with the Business Accreditation Task Force. Technology. AACSB is working hard to figure out technology that will make this less burdensome for the schools that have to complete the reports. So we're thinking about how we can leverage technology. Maybe it can help us with our tables, for example. So I think that you'll find that there's going to be a little bit more support provided to you via technology. Now here is a mapping of the standards. And you'll see, if you look at the color coding, you'll be able to see how some of the old standards, the 15 standards, roll up into the 9 new standards. For example, if you look at standard 3, you'll see 4 standards on the right side and the old standards in green. So it's color-coded. The standards on the right that are green map up to the standards that are the new standards in green. I know I worked on standard 4, and there are 4 standards that actually roll up into that curriculum standard. We don't believe that we lost anything doing this. It was not our intention to, reduce the level that we're going to require to ensure quality. Quality is in here every step of the way. But we were able to take out some redundancy and just make them a little bit terser, and therefore we were able to reduce them to the smaller set. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Stephanie and let her start introducing the standards.
Okay, so that chart that you just saw is on our homepage, and as a matter of fact, all of you just got an email. Y'all gonna look at your phones now. You just got an email with a link that will show you how to see the new standards. So they're online now, so you can see that. And that chart that you saw, I know that was very small, is online as well, so you can look at that if you would like to take a closer look. So the accreditation standards, this is the table of contents page. I wanted to show that to you because it gives you a bird's eye view of what the new standards look like, sort of from 20,000 feet. So one thing you might notice is there's no section that says eligibility criteria. So we used to have eligibility criteria at the very beginning, and that's where we talked about things like scope and things like that. We decided, along with the board, that really a better way to show that is to talk about what's our philosophy, what are our guiding principles. And so that was truer to the spirit of what we wanted to be. And so we have 10 guiding principles in this version. Now, that may or may not end up being the 10 exact guiding principles in the final, because we're still working on this document. But we think the guiding principles say a lot about who we are and what it is we value. We added a section on structure of the standards because, in the old standards, there was really nothing that said, here's what a peer review team needs to look at, and here's what a school needs to look at in terms of their visit coming up. And so we actually added a section that says, the basis for judgment is intended for the peer review team. That's who we wrote that for. But you, as a school who's coming up for a visit, can look at it. You can look at it and you can say, oh, that's what I'm going to be judged against. What used to be called guidance for documentation is now called suggested guidance or suggested documentation. The reason we did that is because I remember being in your shoes, and I remember looking at the long list of things under guidance for documentation and not really knowing, do I have to do everything on that list? It was confusing to me. And so thinking about that, we thought a better way to say that is suggested documentation, and then you work with your peer review team and also the template that we provide to provide what it is you need for your visit. So that's a much better way, we think, than you trying to guess, do I have to do all of those things? So you see that throughout. So that's structure of the standards. We have three different components of the standards. So we used to have 4, we have 3 now. They're called strategic management, learner success, and thought leadership. So when we thought about, from a BATF standpoint, what is it that makes an AACSB school special? What is it that we really value? What is it that we think defines us? And we came up with these buckets. Trust me when I say we went through many iterations, many different types of structures and frameworks. It sort of came down to, it's your strategy. An AACSB school knows who they are and what their strategy is. They are financially vital, and so they're sound financially, and they have quality faculty, quality processes around teaching and learning, and they express thought leadership. They're thought leaders. And so those were the 3 different buckets that we came up with. And so we have 3 standards in that first area, 4, and then 2. So let's take a look at what each of those standards looks like. And again, we're going to talk about this at a high level. You certainly, what we want you to do is go take some time, maybe this evening on the Riverwalk, take a look at, with your standards next to you, and take a look really and drill a little deeper, okay? So we'll tell you what the standard is, but there are these other components under it. So exposure draft number 1 is live as of 4:15, so we're very excited about that. So standards 1 through 3, strategic management, high level. Not a whole lot different in this particular standard, because we feel like we actually got a fair amount right in the 2013 standards. So the real goal here was to move us to more principles-based, away from rules-based, not completely, we still have some rules, but more towards principles-based. The thing that's different in this standard, if you look at the bullets that are there, is really the last bullet. So the other bullets are not new. So the school has to have a strategic plan and show us what your strategies are, what it is your mission is, what you want to achieve, and how you're going to get there. And that's really the essence of strategic planning. We're actually doing a seminar tomorrow afternoon, Tim Escon and I, on strategic planning. So that's the foundation. That's how you show who you are. But it's that last bullet that's added. That's the bullet that's new. So I want to call your attention to that. So it says, the school demonstrates a commitment to positive societal impact as expressed in and supported by its distinctive mission, and specifies how it intends to achieve this impact. So this idea of business education as a force for good, business as a force for good in society, it's one of the things that makes AACSB special. It's one of the reasons why I was attracted to work for AACSB. It's this idea that we together, not individually, though your individual efforts are important, but think about what we can do to really impact the world together. And so we added this in, and you'll actually see this. It's throughout the standards. It shows up in the first standard. It also shows up in the last standard. So we ask you to show us in your strategic plan what it is your school does that has a positive impact on society. We don't define the level. That can be a local level, it can be state, it can be whatever level makes sense for your mission. We have not lost the mission-driven nature of AACSB accreditation, so hugely important. So what do you do? As I travel around the world, schools talk about this a lot, and so we're very excited to be able to put something to the standards that helps bring our vision for AACSB alive. Standard 2 is about the resources. So 2 and 3 are both resources. 2 is the non-human resources, if you will, the infrastructure, and 3 is about the human resources. So in 2 is pretty succinct. So how does the school? The school manages its physical, virtual, and financial resources to sustain the school on an ongoing basis and to promote a high quality, you'll see high quality everywhere, that's just a continuation of who we are, environment that fosters success of all participants in support of the school's mission, strategies, and outcomes. Everything that we do has to be supportive of your distinct mission and your strategies and outcomes. So in this standard, we're really looking at financial vitality. So there's 2 new tables there, and we were very, very thoughtful about tables because we know tables mean there's some work. And so, but we want you to be able to say, here's how we're able to ensure that we are operationally sound and that the things we want to do from a strategic perspective, that we have the resources to do that. So one table is financial vitality, which is what is your budget and budget per FTE. So tell us how are you looking, especially compared to 5 years ago, if you're on a CIR visit. So are your resources going up or down? And then secondly, what do you want to do strategically, and do you have the resources to do that? So those are things I cared about when I visited schools. Standard 3, so this is actually 4 standards. 4 standards together have been rolled into Standard 3. So it's called Faculty and Professional Staff Resources. So this is Standard 5, 6, 7, and 15. So I know most of us think about 5 and 15 together. So 5 is your participating, supporting, 15 is your faculty qualifications. The other 2 are support. How do you support your faculty? How do you support your staff, professional staff? We thought it really made sense to look at that as how do you support the people who are helping to engender your mission. So you see there are 4 bullets. Each of those bullets actually corresponds to one of those 4 standards from the old version. So the beauty of this standard, and really we think this is something you're going to be really excited about, at least I'm very excited about it, is you have much more flexibility now. So I'm not going to read you each part of this. I'm going to hit this at a high level. Participating, supporting is the same as it was before. So the 75 and the 60, so 75 global, 60 for each area. We're actually calling it discipline, but you get to define what that is. Discipline is our placeholder term. So that's the same. That is unchanged from before. We look at faculty being qualified in terms of 4 buckets, and so those are the same 4 buckets everyone's used to. We workshopped this quite a lot, and we were open to anything that the membership wanted to do in this area. If you wanted a different model, we were willing to go there. We did not hear the membership saying that. So, and that was a pretty consistent message. The membership said, we like the 2x2. We're pretty comfortable. We really haven't had enough time to build it into a mature model. So we listened to you, we heard that, and so we kept that the same. We did change the other faculty terminology to additional faculty, so you're welcome.
That's worth a clap.
We want them to feel better about that.
That was, of the 1,000 hours we spent, that was 100 of the hours. So, and also we want to make sure we have sufficient professional staff that help the faculty to do the things they need to do and to run the business school, and that we have well-documented and well-communicated processes around what we do. So what are some of the implications of this? So one of the themes that we heard loud and clear from you is, okay, yes, we're happy with the 2x2, we're okay with the definitions. Please give us some additional flexibility around how we deploy faculty. We heard you, and so what we've done with this version is we've said, okay, you have 2 tests still, so 40% essay, everyone's familiar with that. That is still in place, so 40% by discipline. So discipline would be, for example, finance, management, marketing, accounting. So we're talking about the top level discipline, not management pieces, for example. So management may have many degrees under it, right? So you may have strategy, OB, HR, perhaps entrepreneurship. You might have a number of degrees that live under that discipline. We're looking at the test by the discipline. So the 40% is applied at the discipline level. So that gives you the flexibility then to deploy faculty in the way that's consistent with your strategy and your particular goals. So that is a really big deal. So for you to have more flexibility around that, we heard you on that. The test, the 40% essay, is also a global test. So across the entire business school, and that's unchanged as well, so that was a test that we had already, 40%. So those 2 things. The 60%, in this version, we have eliminated the 60% test. And the reason we did that is not to fall back to the old AQ-PQ model, that's not our intention, but we heard people saying, we want to deploy faculty in the way that we want to deploy them. We want to have the essay, we're on board with the rigor, that's okay with us, but please allow us to deploy them in the way that we want to. And so we heard that, and that has been built into this version of the standards. And we think that is a fabulous, fabulous adjustment for you. I know I would be very excited as a dean to know that I can deploy faculty in the way that meets my strategies and my needs. Some of the other changes, as we think about standards, we're talking about standards not just for today. We have to think about, what does a business school of the future look like? So our time horizon, typically we revise standards historically about every 10 years. This version is a little bit faster than that, but you want to write standards that aren't going to be out of date tomorrow. So that's another reason why you have to be a little bit more principles-based, and you want to be cognizant of that. Who are the faculty that are going to be teaching our students tomorrow? And by the way, the students of tomorrow are not necessarily the students of today. We have all kinds of people, all kinds of learners. So the idea that it's the research doctorate that is the only qualification for SA is not a model that is going to sustain us in the future. So in this language, you'll see terminally qualified. What is an SA faculty member? Terminally qualified in an area closely related to their field of teaching or a related area. We understand that areas evolve, but related to the area that they're teaching in. And we recognize that, for example, a JD is a terminally qualified person to teach law. That's a no-brainer. And the JD might also teach other things that are related to that. Maybe that person has expertise in sustainability or ethics or something else. That could be sliced many ways. That is acceptable. That is okay. That is futuristic and where we want to go. A Master of Science in Tax, an MST, or a Master of Taxation, they can go by different names. That is considered a terminal degree in tax. That would qualify as SA if the person were doing scholarly activity as well. Just having the MST by itself is not going to qualify you to be SA. You have to also be doing scholarly activity in that area. So I think everyone's familiar with those ideas. DBAs, so there's a plethora of types of terminally qualified. Maybe you have a doctor, an MD, who is teaching in your Masters of Health Administration program. Okay, I hope we all think that's okay. That person has probably got great experience, and that's why you've hired them. That's where we need to be. That's where we need to be in the future. So we're trying to be more holistic in that. Let's see if I've covered everything up there. I think I have covered all of that. So let's see. This idea of deployment, again, I've hit on that pretty hard already, but I want to make sure that we're clear on that you will still have what in the old standards would have been Table 15.2. So that shows how you deploy faculty by degree program. It's 3.2 in the new standards. That table still exists, and actually 15.1, which is now 3.1, still exists. So that's going to look familiar, and I hope that gives you a little bit of comfort that you don't have to relearn a whole new system. But that table, where you're showing your peer review team how you deploy faculty, is for conversation. You do not have to meet the ratios for that table. That is not the intention of the standards. And it was not the intention for the 2013. It simply got interpreted that way over the years. So how you deploy your faculty is going to be a strategic decision, and we're very particular in our language. We say that very specifically in the standards. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Nancy to talk about learners of the future.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yes, I have the privilege of talking to you about 4 standards on learner success. In addition to updating the standards, we also modernized our language. So instead of talking about students who study, we're talking about learners who learn. We're talking about competencies, which really combine knowledge, skills, and abilities and prepare students or prepare learners to do the jobs that they're competent to perform. So we've changed that language a little bit, and that's the 4 standards on learner success. The first one is curriculum. Now, the curriculum standard actually combines 4 of the standards from the previous standards, and they're part of what AACSB cares about, and they do find their way into all of these standards. So that's the curriculum standard. Assurance of learning. We got a lot of feedback from you on assurance of learning. But it was really interesting. Once that white paper was released, we heard a lot less, or we heard some very favorable feedback. And that actually gave us a lot of the idea around the interpretive guidance, because we realized that if you had more direction as to how you applied it and how you actually accomplished it, you'd be able to do it much more easily and wouldn't have some of the problems that you had in the past. So assurance of learning, basically what we did was take that white paper, put it into the standard and into the interpretive guidance to be able to give you that direction with it. We do have some changes, though, that we made. First of all, in the first part, you'll see it says direct and indirect assessment. We think indirect assessment is often as important, at least, in how you change your curriculum. Do you go out and ask your employers if they think that your learners have all the knowledge and abilities to do their jobs? Do the learners come back from their internships and tell you, well, we don't know this? Do you go to your advisory councils and say, hey, here's our Masters of Data Analytics program. How does this sound to you? And get feedback from them. those are indirect assessments that often help us shape our programs. So we're asking that indirect assessments be incorporated into the assurance of learning. We also say that programs, this is the equivalency, the second bullet point here, making sure that depending on the location, delivery, and so on, that we do have equivalency in terms of the outcomes in learning. And then we know that learning is changing today. Programs are degree programs. Many learners are coming to us and saying, hey, I don't want to get a whole master's degree, but I'd love to have a certificate in this. So we actually are addressing these micro-learning certificates, and we're saying you don't have to have a full-blown assurance of learning program around those. You don't have to have 4 to 6 learning goals or, and all these kinds of assessments, but we do want you to ensure the quality in some way. Show us how you ensure the quality of those programs. The same is true with executive education. We know that to a large extent, the quality of executive education is told to us by the clients who come and take our executive education. But we also do want you to provide some assurance of learning over that, just not at the detail level that you might have done before. There is a new table here. It's a table 5.1. This table is meant, again, to help you with your filling out of the requirements. So you'll be able to fill in the table and say, this is the competency goal that we have, this is when we assessed it, and this is the feedback, and so on. That will help quite a bit. And then in some other good news, back at that first bullet point, you'll notice that last sentence, specialized new and emerging low enrollment programs may have modified AOL. Remember I just said engagement, impact, innovation. Innovation, we want you to be innovative. So we want you to have a chance to get your program in place. Somebody was telling us the other day that, their data analytics program, it took them a long time to even hire up the faculty to get that off and running. We want you to have time to do that, but then when it's in place, and we don't specify this as principles-based, we don't say that's 2 years, but you will show to us and demonstrate this is a new program, we're really excited about it, and this is how we're going to assure the quality of that program. The next standard is on learner development, and this is the standard, this is old standard 4, and it's really not changed all that much, but this is the admissions, this is the progress through your programs, this is the retention, this is graduation, this is about outcomes. And we have tried to be very outcomes focused, so we're going to ask for some reporting on the outcomes of your learners once they leave your programs. What happens to them? Where do they go? Do they get jobs? Do they go into graduate programs? We're going to be asking for some reporting on that. But we also want to make sure that you have appropriate staff in place to be able to accomplish all of these things. Are you helping your students, those who are struggling a little bit? Are you helping them more? Do you have the staff to be able to do that? So job placement results will matter, but again, this standard is largely unchanged. There's not a lot that's different here. The last one in the learner success section is on teaching effectiveness and impact. We think that teaching is really, really important, and we want to make sure that our standard addresses that faculty are current, that faculty are well prepared to go into the classroom. I said in Standard 4, we actually have a sentence about that in doctoral programs. But teaching effectiveness matters quite a bit, and it matters that we help our teachers get ready to be able to do that, right? So development, being able to offer opportunities to your teachers to be able to become better teachers, to be able to be mentored, perhaps, or to attend conferences on teaching. All of that's important. We're looking for development activities that are in place to enhance faculty teaching and make sure they can deliver the curriculum. Things are changing so fast. We have to be able to let our faculty get that development and stay current and be able to help our students and learners get prepared. So current in their discipline and in the different pedagogical methods. We know many of our faculty are learning to teach online, and they hadn't done that before. We want to make sure they have appropriate resources available to help them to be able to do that. And then what's really most new in this standard, I think, is the part on impact. We really did want to be very outcomes focused. So great, they're good teachers. What impact are they having beyond they're doing a good job in their classroom with their students? We're looking beyond that for scholarship of teaching and learning. We're looking to see that your faculty are winning awards or going and presenting at conferences or distributing the knowledge that they have about teaching in different ways. Not all of them, we recognize that. But we do want to see how the teachers are having impact in a variety of ways. So thinking about that outcomes focused, we have added and incorporated impact in here. And that's it for the learner success standards. I do want to remind you, and we will remind you again, but this is exposure draft 1, and we will look forward to your questions and look forward to listening to you over the next 60 days while we continue to evolve these standards. Jeff?
Thank you. Thought leadership. What's different in these two standards is in the other standards, we have reduced the number of standards that we have. Here, we've introduced a new standard. So this standard, this category has two standards. The first is looking at the impact of scholarship. So if you think of the old standard 2, this is close to that, but with some significant changes. And there was a lot of feedback on a number of areas in this standard, in particular, some confusion about what is basic and what is applied research. And the other feedback in particular was we needed to move to a more principles-based than a rules-based. In other words, we said that PRJs had to predominate in your intellectual contributions, where in fact there are schools who have missions where that doesn't make sense. And so a more principles-based approach allows for that flexibility. So in the impact of scholarship standard, it's still the aim of the school is to produce high-quality intellectual contributions that have an impact on the knowledge, management, and practice of management, the pedagogy and the pedagogy of management. So that remains the same. But in the standard, we have clarified what is meant by basic and what is meant by applied research, looking in particular at the key audience. So we're saying that basic research, the major audience of basic research is academe. The major audience of applied research is business, government, the community more broadly. Now I know there is research that straddles both, but I think that clarifies quite a lot because there were differences across countries and across schools on how we looked at basic and applied. The second component is recognizing that there are a broad range of intellectual contributions and that for a particular school, the type of intellectual contributions they do will be driven by their mission and by what they're trying to achieve. So in this part of the standard, what we've said that you have intellectual contributions matching your mission. However, if you are a school that has a lot of postgraduate research programs, then clearly you would expect your faculty to be producing peer-reviewed journal articles. The third area is we're wanting schools to be explicit about how they're dealing with the predatory journal situation. As we're all aware, this is something which has grown and continues to be fostered in various places around the world. And so policies around how schools are working with predatory journals and making sure that their faculty are not publishing in those is also in the standard. Something else that's been added. In the old standard 2, the emphasis was on the intellectual contributions of individual faculty aggregated up into departments. But it was mainly the emphasis on individual faculty aggregated. That still stays here, but also an encouragement for schools to outline what units or departments or the school as a whole might be doing. For example, you might have a department that runs industry academic colloquiums. You might have schools that run conferences. There are schools that publish journals and business case clearinghouses. So we encourage those things to come forward. Those are important intellectual contributions. So the old Table 2.1 has become Table 8.1, and it's been simplified to a higher level so that in the types of intellectual contributions we've come down to 3, which is peer-reviewed journal articles, other peer-reviewed outputs, and then non-peer-reviewed outputs. In Part B of the table, where you talk about how it aligns with the mission, that's where you can unpack the types of intellectual contributions you have. For example, you might be a very applied school that writes white papers for industry or policy papers. Then in Part B of Table 8.1, you have the chance to explain that. Right, moving on to the new standard. What was really interesting when we went out to the AACSB membership and we talked about what did, if you thought about AACSB in the future, what were you really wanting it to look like? And there was this idea it should be aspirational, that we should be making a difference in society, that we should be addressing some of the bigger problems, and that every business school should have an idea or an aspiration around what its thought leadership is and how that's making a difference. So in this standard, we're expecting schools to provide thought leadership that supports external communities, that enhances business practice, and addresses real issues facing society. Now, clearly, that will be different for many schools, different types of schools. It might be in a local context, regional, national, international, and the type of thought leadership will vary as well. So in this standard, we want you to outline your aspiration in thought leadership, what you're trying to achieve. Then to identify what you've done over the last 5 years, and then what are your plans for the future. And again, schools will be at different places in their development on that spectrum. Also in this standard, we pick up what was in Standard 1. As Stephanie mentioned, in Standard 1, there's the question of societal impact. So in this standard, when it's under thought leadership, we're looking at how is your thought leadership, your contributions through your thought leadership, that is your connections with industry, broader society, policymakers, the community. They could be by your faculty, they could be by units, departments, and by students. How are they making a difference to major issues in society? And again, you identify your aspiration. You identify where you've got to in the last 5 years, and you identify where you're going in the future. So this is the new standard, which doesn't have any old standard that maps to it. All right, I'll hand back to Stephanie.
That's the 9 standards, and so I hope you're as excited as we are. When you think about it, there are some really good stuff that we kept, that engagement, impact, innovation, still in there. Rigor is still in there, but we're allowing you more flexibility to be able to tell us what you do, deploy your faculty, take away constraints that were keeping you from being innovative. So it's one thing that I kept hearing over and over again is we want to do innovative things, but we can't do it because we're not going to be in alignment with the standards. So we've made a really conscious effort on that to make sure that you have the freedom to do innovative things, to work in an interdisciplinary way. If we want to solve the world's problems, we can do it. Business school can do it. But we're most likely going to be successful by doing that through partnerships with others. So we have to have standards that allow that. We have to have standards that encourage that. So we're giving you, in this set of standards, the flexibility and freedom and the strong encouragement to do those things, because that's what's going to change the world. And that's how we think business education can change the world. So a question that always comes up is, when is this going to happen? So assuming that we have a positive vote next year, remember that we still have 2 more versions of the standards to go through. The vote would happen at ICAM next year, as I said, April 27th, and then they would become effective for the 2021, but there's a 3-year phase-in period. So if you've been around a long time, you know that we always phase in standards. We don't just turn a switch and everybody's on the new standards. So there's a 3-year phase-in period. You would be able to select, if you were coming up for a visit during that 3-year period, you'd be able to select whether you wanted to come up under the 2013 standards or the 2020 standards. So you would be able to make that decision. By the time we get to July 1st of 2023, then everyone would be expected to be under the new standards. I suspect strongly that you're going to like them so well that we may have a bit of a stampede, but that's a good thing. That's a good problem to have, and we're ready for that. So that's what that phase-in looks like. If you're in initial accreditation, get that question a lot. I'm in initial, what do I need to do? We will work with you. So don't fear, we have staff that will work with you and figure out which way you want to go. So we're prepared for that. The My Accreditation product that'll be rolled out starting next month, that also has been developed with this in mind, and it's a very easy thing to do to be under either of those standards. So no issues with that as well. So we've been thinking quite far ahead. As Nancy was talking about the three parts of this project of reimagining, reimagining is a big word, and we felt the weight of that responsibility very heavily. You don't reimagine just through standards. You reimagine through changing people's hearts and minds. You reimagine by allowing people to do the things that they really want to do and not hold them back through artificial constraints. You reimagine through having processes that work for the membership. Instead of against the membership, they work for the membership. And so those are things we're working very hard on. We had actually it was a little less than 8 hours yesterday, but our task force, who has spent roughly 1,000 hours, is working very hard on the processes. We're going to start socializing ideas on processes with you. We've already taken a lot of input. Many of you have given input already, but now we're starting to really get down to, okay, are we going to have a different cycle time? Is it going to be a 5-year, 7-year, 20-year visit? But no, it's not 20. So, but all of those questions we are going to continue to refine. We'll be taking additional input, and that's probably a spring topic. So you'll begin to hear more about what we're going to propose towards the spring, towards Exposure Draft 2. But we're excited about that. And then Nancy also mentioned volunteer training. It's absolutely essential. It's absolutely essential that everyone who goes up under the new standards, all volunteers on peer review teams will be required to go through the volunteer training. When we socialized this idea, virtually unanimously, membership agreed with that, because you don't want a team to come and visit and do your visit and they haven't been trained in the new standards. And they tell you, oh, you can't deploy your faculty that way because they are not attenuated to the new standards. We want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that everybody understands principles-based. This is a big ship to turn. That is quite a change for us. So we want to make sure everyone's on the same page with that. And so I know you'll be excited. I think everyone universally says, please make sure when you send a team to my school that they know, they understand the intent of the standards. We got you. We got you on that. So, what's next with our continuing engagement? So would you tell us a little about that?
I sure will. So Stephanie mentioned that we've worked about the Business Accreditation Task Force has put in about 1,000 hours. I mean, they've met many times in person. They've met virtually. I've gotten really good at Zoom around the world, and Jeff has gotten really good at being up in the middle of the night or, very, very early in the morning. But a lot of work has gone on, but we are not finished by any means. You are looking at Exposure Draft 1. Please keep that in mind. We are waiting to hear from you. We want your reactions, and we're going to give you a lot of opportunities to give us feedback on that. After 60 days of listening to you, we'll have a new exposure draft, and then we'll listen on that, and then we'll come to the final. So again, please don't think that we're finished by any means. The Business Accreditation Task Force is going to continue to meet and continue to listen, continue to refine the standards. Here listed for you are some of the meetings that are coming up, where you also will have an opportunity to hear more about the standards and to be able to give your opinions and your feedback to us. We did work really hard to try to find consensus where we could, but we do know in some cases that's fairly even, and we tried to tip the balance and find the balance where we could. We're anxious to hear from you about how you feel about that and your reactions. So please do try and take advantage of one of these upcoming conversations to be able to come back to us. And be sure to join us tomorrow morning. Now, this is not the Q&A session. This is the, okay, great, as Stephanie said, you're going out onto the Riverwalk. You've got plenty of time to sit there at that table and read those standards on your phones. So please do that. And I don't know why these people are laughing. I know we'll be thinking about our standards. Yep. So tomorrow morning at 8:15, we will have a bonus session for you where you'll be able to address the burning questions that are in your mind, and that will be an open session for the new standards. I want to turn it over now for some key dates for you.
So today is the first exposure draft, and as I said, it's been built from all the feedback we received. So thank you so much to all of those who put your hand up and gave feedback. You'll see that there's 60 days in which all of you can give feedback, and all of the membership can give feedback on this first draft. So all that feedback is required by November the 16th. After that, we'll work on the second exposure draft that will be released around the time of the Dean's meeting in February of next year. We'll also be seeking feedback on that exposure draft, but you can see there that the feedback period is only a month, from February to March. Following the feedback on the second exposure draft, we will get to the final exposure draft, which will go through to be approved by the, initially pre-approved by the board of AACSB, to go to ICAM, where it is voted on by the membership as a whole. So there's a number of steps for your key involvement going forward. Firstly is the feedback on this exposure draft. Secondly, the feedback on the second exposure draft. And thirdly, make sure you come to ICAM so you can cast your vote, because it is a member's vote that decides whether these standards go forward.
Just one little clarification on that. So every accredited school has one vote.
Accredited school, that's right.
Every accredited school has one vote, so just want to make sure I'm clear on that. But yes, we do want to encourage you to come. Please tell your deans, if your deans are not here, that that's a really essential meeting for them to be at. If you are a dean here today, please be there. It's a really important vote. I want to give just some special shout outs, people I think deserve really special attention. Nancy and Jeff have done unbelievable work, unbelievable.
If I could just interrupt, we do need to thank Stephanie, because she has been absolutely outstanding.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I also want to say that Karen Beck-Dudley, who is our past board chair, this was her charge. So as the leadership of this organization, Karen said, we need to move on this. We've got to be forward-looking. This was Karen's charge. I want to say thank you to our board chair for doing that. Thank you, Karen. If you are a member of the BATF, I see one here. Can you stand for, I see two. Can you stand if you were a member of this 15-member task force? And I want to make sure that we recognize you. Okay? Thank you so much. 1,000 hours down, 1,000 to go. So you can reach all of us. Here's our email. But the way that you actually give feedback on this is really not to send us an email. It's you send the email to the prior batf@aacsb.edu, because else I'll have 10,000 emails. So it's a special place that we collect your feedback. And every person that writes there, every person that provides, we analyze and we provide data. And we provide analytics to our task force, and we tell them, here's what the membership is telling us. So I can't emphasize it enough that these are your standards. So with that, we are at the end of our session. Please be with us tomorrow, 8:15. I hope you wrote down some questions, and it'll be open mic. You get to ask all the questions. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening.